Pack your things and get out of my son's house, my daughter-in-law said, standing in my own kitchen holding a spatula like a scepter. You've been a burden long enough. When I didn't move, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, loud enough for my son and the neighbors through the open window to hear, "You are pathetic. A useless old woman who can't even pay her own way." I set down my coffee mug, I picked up my purse, and I walked out. 3 weeks later, she lost everything, and I mean everything. But to understand how we got there, I need to go back. Not to that morning, not even to the year they moved in. I need to go back to the day my husband Harold died, because that's when everything started to unravel, even if I didn't know it yet. Harold had a heart attack on a Wednesday afternoon in March. He was 68 years old and had never been sick a day in his life. One minute he was raking leaves in the backyard of the house we'd owned for 31 years. The house in Dayton, Ohio, where we'd raised our son and painted the kitchen yellow twice because I kept changing my mind about the shade. The next minute he was gone. Just like that. No warning. No goodbye. The first year without him was the kind of lonely that doesn't have a name. I rattled around that house like a marble in a shoebox. My son Gregory called every Sunday. He lived in Columbus with his wife Thompson and their daughter Poppy, who was 4 years old and had Harold's eyes. I lived for those calls. I lived for the holidays when they'd drive down and Poppy would run through the front door and wrap herself around my legs. It was Gregory who suggested it, about 14 months after Harold died. He drove down alone one Sunday, sat at my kitchen table, and said, "Mom, this house is too big for you. You're 63 years old. You shouldn't be alone." He was worried, and I could see it in the way he held his coffee cup with both hands, the way Harold used to when something was weighing on him. "We have the space," he said. "Tamsin and I talked about it. You'd have your own room. You'd be close to Poppy. It would be good for all of us." I asked him if Thompson really wanted this. He said yes. He looked me right in the eye when he said it. How naive I was to believe him. The house in Columbus was a 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet neighborhood with a big maple in the front yard. When I moved in, Tamsin hugged me at the door. She'd set fresh flowers on the dresser in my room, yellow tulips, and I thought, maybe this is going to be wonderful. Maybe this is what Harold would have wanted. The first few months were fine. Tamsin was polite, maybe a little reserved. But I figured we needed time to find our rhythm. I helped with Poppy. I cooked dinner twice a week. I stayed out of her way when she wanted the living room to herself in the evenings. I told myself I was a guest in their home, and I should act like one. But I was not a guest. I owned that understanding, one humiliation at a time. It started with the cooking. I made a pot roast one Sunday, Harold's recipe, the one that took 4 hours and made the whole house smell like something a grandmother should smell like. Thompson came into the kitchen, lifted the lid, and said, without turning to look at me, "We don't really eat red meat anymore. Gregory's cholesterol." I threw the whole pot away that evening after they went to bed. Then it was my schedule. I liked to wake up early, around 5:30, to have my coffee in the quiet before the house came alive. Tamsin came downstairs one morning and told me the coffee maker noise was waking her up. Could I wait until 7? I started making instant coffee in my room with an electric kettle I ordered from Amazon. Then it was my friends. I had a standing Tuesday lunch with 2 women I'd known since Poppy's mother was still in diapers herself. My neighbor from Dayton, Claudette, who'd moved to Columbus 2 years prior, and a woman named Fern I'd met at the library book club. Tamsin had a way of scheduling things on Tuesday mornings that meant I needed to be home to pick Poppy up from preschool. Not every Tuesday. Just enough of them that I started to feel like my own time wasn't mine to plan. I kept telling myself it was compromise. That's what family does. The day I knew something had shifted permanently was a Thursday evening about 2 years in. I'd been in the backyard, deadheading the rose bushes, and I came inside through the back door to find Tamsin sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop and a glass of wine, clearly in the middle of something. She looked up and said, without any particular hostility, as if she were commenting on the weather, "Gregory and I were thinking your room would work better as his home office. Now that he's working remotely full-time, there's a perfectly good room in the basement. It's quieter down there. You'd have more privacy. The basement. I stood there with dirt on my gardening gloves and felt the floor tilt slightly under me. I'd been sleeping in the second largest bedroom in the house. The basement had a pull-out couch, a small window near the ceiling, and the water heater. I'll think about it, I said. We'd love to get started on the office soon, she said, and looked back at her laptop. I moved to the basement the following weekend. Gregory carried my boxes down the stairs and didn't say a single word about it. Not one word. I kept waiting for him to say something, anything, and he never did. He just carried boxes and asked if I needed another lamp. That silence became the thing I dreaded most. The years that followed were a slow erosion. I cooked, cleaned, watched Poppy before and after school, while Tamsin went to her Pilates class and her lunch meetings and her weekend spa trips with her friends. I did the grocery shopping, the laundry, the dishes. I was the one who sat up with Poppy when she had a fever. I was the one who learned every word of every song from every children's show on that television. And every year, I got a little smaller. Not physically, internally. The way a person gets smaller when they are told, often enough, in ways large and small, that they take up too much space. My birthday that year, my 69th, was the moment something in me began, very quietly, to wake up. I'd mentioned to Gregory 3 weeks before that I'd like to have my Tuesday lunch group over for coffee and cake. Just the three of us. Just 2 hours in the living room on a Saturday afternoon. He said, of course, that sounded nice. The Saturday morning of my birthday, I came upstairs to find Tamsin in the kitchen with a woman I didn't recognize and 2 men in paint-splattered jeans. She was pointing at the living room wall and saying something about accent colors. "Oh, perfect timing," she said when she saw me. "We're having the downstairs repainted today. You don't mind rescheduling your little coffee thing, do you? The fumes would be terrible." My friends were already on their way. I had to call Claudette from the basement while I listened to the paint crew set up tarps in the living room above my head, and I said the words I'd said so many times by then that they'd worn grooves in my tongue. Something came up. "I'm so sorry." Claudette was quiet for a moment, then said, "Rosemary, what is happening in that house?" "Nothing," I said. "Everything's fine." But nothing was fine, and somewhere below the part of me that kept insisting otherwise, I knew it. 3 months later, on a Friday morning in October, Tamsin planted herself in the kitchen while I was making oatmeal and said almost pleasantly, "We need to talk about the finances." I turned around. "Gregory and I have been carrying a lot of the household expenses," she said. "Utilities, groceries, Poppy school. It adds up. We were thinking it would be fair if you contributed more. Specifically," she paused, like she'd rehearsed this, "we think it makes sense for you to sign the house over. Your house in Dayton. You're not living there. It's sitting empty. If you put it in Gregory's name, we could rent it out, use the income to offset costs here." My house. The house Harold and I bought in 1989. The house where I'd painted the kitchen yellow, where Gregory had grown up, where Harold had raked leaves the last day of his life. I felt very still. "That's my house," I said. "It's an asset that isn't doing anything," she said. "We're the ones supporting you." I said I'd think about it. I said it the way I always said it, which was to say I wasn't going to do it, and I needed her to stop looking at me like that. That night, I called Claudette. I told her about the house. There was a silence on the other end, and then she said, "Rosemary, you need to talk to someone, a lawyer." I said that was dramatic. She said, "Honey, I watched my own mother lose her house this exact same way, and I'm telling you, talk to a lawyer." I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the pull-out couch in the basement, staring at the strip of light under the door, and I thought about Harold's voice, the way he used to say my name like it meant something, like I meant something. I called Claudette the next morning and said, "Give me the name of a lawyer." His name was Edwin Marsh, and he worked out of a modest office park off Route 40, the kind of place with a fake ficus by the receptionist desk and framed diplomas on the wall. He was in his mid-50s, with reading glasses on a cord around his neck, and the manner of a man who'd heard everything and was no longer surprised by any of it. I told him everything, all of it. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "The house in Dayton. You have never signed any documents transferring ownership?" "No." "And the deed is still in your name?" "Yes." "It's been in my name since Harold died. He left everything to me." Edwin took off his glasses and set them on the desk. "Mrs. Whitfield, Rosemary." "Rosemary? Your daughter-in-law cannot touch that property without your signature. What she's asking you to do is voluntary. The question is why she's asking." I said I assumed it was the rent income. He looked at me steadily. "Has she or your son mentioned any financial difficulties? Any debts?" I thought about it. The new car Tamsin had gotten last spring, the BMW silver that she'd mentioned Gregory had taken out a loan for, the credit card bills I'd once seen on the kitchen counter, a stack of them, before she'd swept them into a drawer when she noticed me looking. The way Gregory always seemed tense when the subject of money came up, a tension he didn't have when Harold was still alive. "Possibly," I said. "I'd like to look into some things," Edwin said. "With your permission." He called me 8 days later and asked me to come back in. I sat across from him again, and this time he had a folder on the desk. He opened it. "Your son and daughter-in-law have significant debt," he said. Not gently, just plainly, the way you state a fact. 3 credit cards between them totaling roughly $42,000. A home equity line of credit they've drawn down almost entirely. That's another $60,000. 2 personal loans. And a delinquent notice from the IRS for unpaid taxes, approximately $18,000. The number sat in the air between us. $120,000, I said, roughly. The house in Dayton, per the county assessor, has a current market value of approximately $380,000. $380,000, Harold's house, our house. She's not asking for rent income, I said. "No," Edwin said. "She's asking for the house." I drove home on autopilot. I made dinner that night on autopilot. I put Poppy to bed, read her 2 chapters of her book, kissed her forehead, and went downstairs to the basement. And I sat on the edge of the pull-out couch in the dark for a long time. I built a life in that house. Harold and I had painted every room ourselves. We planted the rose bushes along the fence the summer Gregory turned 10. The mortgage was paid off in 2011, and Harold had opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving, and we drunk it on the back porch in lawn chairs and felt, for one good evening, like everything had worked out exactly right. And Tamsin wanted to sell it to pay off her credit cards. I called Edwin the next morning and told him I was ready to do whatever he suggested. He said, "Document everything, every request she makes, every comment about the house or your finances, write it down with the date and time. Keep your phone on you. If he brings it up again, record the conversation. Ohio is a one-party consent state, which means you can record any conversation you're a part of without telling the other person." I bought a small notebook at the drugstore. I started writing things down. I didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks after my meeting with Edwin, Tamsin sat down across from me at the kitchen table after Gregory had gone to bed and said, "Have you thought any more about the Dayton house?" I had my phone in my cardigan pocket, recorder running. "I've been thinking about it," I said. "Good." She folded her hands on the table. "Because we really need to move forward. Gregory and I have some obligations coming due, and the rental income from that property could make a real difference." She paused. "Or honestly, at this point it might make more sense just to sell it outright. It's been empty for 3 years, you're not going back there, and the money could help set you up somewhere more appropriate." She said the last 2 words carefully, like she was being delicate. "A senior community, maybe. Somewhere, with people your own age, activities, support. You'd be more comfortable." There it was. Sell my house. Put me in a facility. Pocket the money. That's a big decision, I said. My voice was remarkably steady. "It is," she agreed. "But it's practical. You're 69, Rosemary. You can't live in our basement forever." The way she said it, our basement, as if I were a tenant whose lease was almost up. "I'll think about it," I said. She smiled. "Don't take too long. These things have a window." I went downstairs and sent the recording to Edwin. He called me the next morning. Good, he said. That's usable. Keep going. What happened next I found by accident. Gregory had asked me to print something from his laptop one afternoon while he was at work. A permission slip for Poppy's class trip. He'd emailed it to himself and couldn't get to it in time. He'd left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. I found the permission slip in his inbox, printed it, and was about to close the browser when I saw an email in his sent folder, the preview visible before I looked away. The subject line said, Property transfer, Whitfield/Dayton. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then I sat down. Then I read it. It was a correspondence between Gregory and a real estate attorney named, I would later learn, Dexter Crane. They had been in conversation for 6 weeks. The emails laid out a plan. Gregory would have me sign a quitclaim deed, transferring the Dayton house into a joint account in his and Tamsin's names. Crane had already identified a buyer, a developer who wanted the property for a teardown. Proposed sale price, $340,000. They were planning to close by the end of the year. There was an earlier email in the thread where Gregory wrote, "She's resistant. Tamsin is working on her. We need to be careful how we approach it. She's sharper than she looks." Sharper than she looks. I took photographs of every email in that thread. My hands were not shaking. I was past shaking. I texted Ed when I found something. "Can I come in tomorrow?" He texted back within minutes. "Yes. Bring everything." I was at his office by 9 the next morning. I showed him the photos. He read them twice without speaking. Then he looked up at me and said, "Rosemary, your son is planning to use a quitclaim deed to transfer property that is legally yours. If you sign it under pressure, or if it can be shown that you were coerced, that is avoidable transaction." But more importantly, he tapped a photo of Crane's email, the one with the sale timeline. They have already engaged a buyer. They were going to present this to you as a done deal. "What do?" I asked. "First," he said, "we file a notice of interest with the county recorder's office. That flags the property so that any attempted transfer triggers a review. No one can sell that house without the county knowing you've asserted an ownership claim." He paused. "Second, we talk about whether you want to pursue this legally or handle it privately. What's the difference? Privately means you confront them, you take back control of the situation on your own terms, and they leave without charges. Legally means we go to the county and potentially to civil court. Depending on what we find, there could be criminal exposure, coercion, elder financial abuse. Ohio has specific statutes. I thought about Poppy. About Gregory as a boy, the way he used to fall asleep in the car and Harold would carry him inside. "I'm not trying to put my son in prison," I said. "Then let's give him the chance to make a different choice," Edwin said. "But we protect you first, and we do it before they make their next move." That night I drove to Claudette's apartment. She poured me a glass of sweet tea and sat across from me at her kitchen table while I told her everything. When I finished, she said, "What do you need from me?" "I need you to be a witness," I said. "If this goes anywhere, I need people who can say I'm of sound mind, that I'm sharp, that nothing about my behavior has been erratic or confused. I will stand up in any courtroom in Ohio and say exactly that," she said without hesitating. I also called Fern. Same conversation, same answer. The following Saturday, Thompson tried again. She'd come downstairs, this was new, she rarely came to the basement, and sat on the bottom step like we were having a casual chat. "Gregory and I have been in touch with a notary," she said. "We thought it might be easier if someone just came to the house to walk you through the paperwork. The quitclaim deed is pretty straightforward. It would take 20 minutes. They had a notary. They were ready to move." "That's thoughtful," I said. My phone was recording. "We could do it Wednesday," she said. "Poppy has dance at 4, so we'd have some quiet time." "I'll be ready," I said. She went back upstairs and I texted Edwin. He called me that evening. "Wednesday is fine," he said. "Let them bring the notary, but before they sit down, I'll be there. I'm going to need you to let me in the front door at noon." "You're going to be there?" "With a colleague who specializes in elder financial abuse litigation," he said. And a county sheriff's deputy if you want one. I want one, I said. I didn't sleep well Tuesday night, but it wasn't dread. It was the specific alertness of someone who knows something is about to change and has decided they are ready. Wednesday afternoon. The notary arrived at 2 o'clock, a young woman with a rolling briefcase who shook my hand and said she was there to help with some paperwork. Gregory was home from work early. Tamsin was in the kitchen, moving around in that way she had when she was performing normalcy, offering water, straightening things on the counter that didn't need straightening. At 2:15, I opened the front door for Edwin. He walked in, followed by a woman I didn't know and a uniformed sheriff's deputy. The notary stopped in the middle of the living room. Gregory went very still by the kitchen doorway. Tamsin's hand froze on the cabinet door. "I'm Edwin Marsh," Edwin said in his pleasant, unremarkable way. "I'm Mrs. Whitfield's attorney. This is my colleague, Patricia Owens, who specializes in elder financial law. And this is Deputy Harmon from the County Sheriff's Office, who is here as a courtesy because we filed documentation with both the County Recorder and the County Prosecutor's Office regarding the attempted transfer of property at 4417 Sycamore Lane, Dayton, Ohio." The notary looked at her briefcase and then at Gregory. Gregory looked at me. "Ma'am," he said. His voice cracked slightly. "What is this?" "This," I said, "is me, not signing anything." Tamsin walked into the living room. Her composure was remarkable, I'll give her that. "This is a misunderstanding," she said to Edwin. "Gregory is on the deed." "He is not," Edwin said. "We have the county records here. The property at 407 Sycamore Lane is titled solely in the name of Rosemary Jean Whitfield. It has been since the death of Harold Whitfield in 2019. Your husband has never been on the deed." "She agreed to transfer it," Tamsin said. Her voice was still level, but something behind her eyes had begun to shift. "She said she'd think about it. That's agreement." "No," Edwin said pleasantly, "that is not agreement. That is a 70-year-old woman in a vulnerable living situation being pressured repeatedly by family members to surrender a significant asset." He looked at her steadily. "We have recordings of 3 conversations in which you explicitly requested the transfer of the property and suggested placing Mrs. Whitfield in a senior care facility as part of the arrangement. We also have email correspondence between your husband and a real estate attorney indicating a buyer was already secured before Mrs. Whitfield had agreed to anything." Gregory sat down on the couch. He put his head in his hands. The notary quietly zipped up her briefcase and said she'd see herself out. Tamsin looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not the polished contempt I'd gotten used to, not the performance of concern. Something rawer than that. "You recorded me," she said. "I did," I said. "In my own house. In my son's house," I said, "which is not the same thing. What happened in the hour that followed was not pleasant, and I will not linger on it. There was a conversation between Gregory and Edwin that I sat through with my hands folded in my lap and my face as still as I could keep it. There was a moment when Tamsin, for the first and only time in the years I'd known her, cried with what appeared to be genuine feeling, not for me, I think, but for the version of the future she'd been building in her head, the one that was now gone. Edwin laid it out simply. No criminal charges would be filed, not today, as long as both Gregory and Tamsin signed a document acknowledging that the Dayton property was mine alone, that no transfer of any kind would be pursued, and that they would cease any communications with Dexter Crane or any other party regarding the sale of that property. If they did not sign, he would be contacting the county prosecutor's office and a civil litigation attorney before the end of the week. Gregory signed without speaking. Tamsin signed last. When she set the pen down, she looked at me and said, "You couldn't just trust us." "No," I said, "I couldn't. I left that evening with a suitcase and Claudette waiting in the driveway. I didn't slam the door. I closed it quietly. The way Harold always said you could tell a person's character by how they closed the door when they were angry. I'd married a man with good character, and I'd spent 40 years trying to earn that same description. I spent 2 weeks at Claudette's before I went home to Dayton. I hadn't been in the house in 3 years. It smelled stale the way houses do when they've been closed up, and there was a thin layer of dust on everything, but the bones were right. The yellow kitchen walls had faded to something closer to cream, and the rose bushes along the back fence had gone a little wild without anyone to tend them. I stood in the backyard in the cold November air and looked at them for a long time. "I'm back," I said to Harold, to the house, to no one in particular. I called a cleaning service. I had the furnace inspected. I bought new curtains for the bedroom. Small things, purposeful things. The kind of things you do when you are reclaiming a space. Gregory called on a Sunday, 3 weeks after I'd left. I let it ring twice, then answered. He sounded like a man who hadn't been sleeping. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't understood the full extent of what Tamsin had been planning, that he'd known things were tight financially and that she'd had a plan for the house, but he hadn't known about Crane, hadn't known how far she'd taken it. I let him talk. When he was done, I said, "You knew enough. You let it go further than you should have. You carried my boxes to the basement, and you didn't say a word, Gregory. And that is something we're going to have to live with together for a long time." There was a long silence. "I know," he said. "Poppy can visit," I said. "Anytime, I mean that. She is always welcome here. And you can visit too, Gregory, because you are my son and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But things are different now. I need you to understand that." "I understand," he said, and I believe he did. Tamsin filed for divorce 4 months later. I don't know all the details, and I didn't ask. I know that the financial situation came out fully in the proceedings and that the outcome was not generous to her. I know that Gregory got primary custody of Poppy, who is now in 2nd grade and calls me every Thursday after school to tell me about her week. I rented the back bedroom in the Dayton house to a woman named Harriet. No, wait, I need to check myself here. To a woman named Gwen, a retired school teacher who keeps a tidy room and makes the best banana bread I've ever had. She pays $800 a month, which covers the property taxes, and then some. We eat dinner together on Tuesdays, and she is quiet in the mornings, which is the only thing I've ever really needed from a housemate. I still have my Tuesday lunches with Claudette and Fern. We go to the same diner on 5th Street that we've been going to for years. I order the same thing every time, a BLT on toast and a cup of soup. We talk for 2 hours, sometimes longer. I started a garden journal, which sounds small but isn't. Harold always said I had a gift for growing things and just lacked the patience to write any of it down. I'm writing it down now. What went in, when, what came up. What survived the winter and what didn't. The rose bushes survived, all of them. I think about the morning Tamsin told me to pack my things. I think about standing in that kitchen in a house that wasn't mine, in a basement that wasn't mine, in a life that had quietly stopped being mine. And I think about the particular silence that followed when I picked up my purse. I was 69 years old. I was, by the measure of what happened next, just getting started. If you are somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, if someone in your life has been telling you, with words or with silence, that you are less than you are, that your age makes you smaller, that what is yours is somehow up for negotiation, I want you to hear this from someone who came out the other side. You are not a burden. You are not a guest in your own story, and it is never, in any season of your life, too late to walk out of a room that has stopped deserving you. I did it at 69. You can do it at any age. The roses came back this spring better than they ever have. Harold would have said that figures. I think about the basement a lot, not with bitterness anymore, mostly with a kind of quiet wonder that I let it go on as long as I did. A woman who owned a paid-off house in Dayton, Ohio, sleeping next to a water heater, making instant coffee with an electric kettle so she wouldn't wake anyone up. That was me. That was my life for 3 years, and I told myself it was compromise. I told myself it was what family does. What I've come to understand, looking back at all of it, is that what happened to me didn't happen all at once. It happened in inches. A comment about the cooking. A request about the coffee maker. A slow, patient rearranging of my life until there was almost nothing left of it that was mine. Tamsin didn't need to be cruel every day. She just needed to be consistent. And I let her be because I confused endurance with grace and silence with keeping the peace. The morning I sat in Edwin's office and heard the number $120,000 in debt, a buyer already lined up, a timeline already set, something in me that had been half asleep for years came fully awake, not with anger, though there was anger, with clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when you finally stop pretending that what you are seeing is something other than what it is. I had spent 3 years being reasonable, being accommodating, asking for nothing, accepting less, making myself small so that everyone around me could feel large. And none of it had protected me. None of it had earned me 1 ounce of the consideration I kept telling myself was coming if I just waited a little longer, gave a little more. The truth is that people who intend to take from you will keep taking for exactly as long as you let them. That is not cynicism. That is just cause and effect, as reliable as anything I ever grew in a garden. What saved me wasn't luck. It was Claudette saying, "Talk to a lawyer," and me finally listening. It was Edwin, steady and unrattled, explaining what my rights actually were. It was the decision, quiet, private, made alone in the dark of that basement, to stop waiting for Gregory to step up and start stepping up myself. Intelligence isn't just about being sharp or knowing things. It's about being willing to look at a situation honestly, without the filter of what you wish were true, and act on what you actually see. I was slow to get there, but I got there. And then I had to hold. Walking into that living room on a Wednesday afternoon with a lawyer and a deputy, knowing my son was going to look at me like I had betrayed him, that took something I didn't know I still had. It would have been easier to sign the deed. It would have been easier to tell myself that family comes first and let family mean whatever Tamsin needed it to mean that week. But easier is not the same as right, and I had spent enough years choosing easier. Gregory is not a villain in this story. He was weak when I needed him to be strong, and that is its own kind of harm, but I think he knows it. He is working on it. Poppy calls me every Thursday and tells me about her week in the particular, winding, beautiful way that 7-year-olds tell stories, and when I hear her voice I think, this is what I stayed standing for. The rose bushes came back this spring. All of them. You tend to what matters. You protect what's yours, and things grow. That's the whole of it, really. That's the whole of what I learned.